name is F. Murray Abraham, and I believe that Joe Papp was the greatest producer of the 20th century. I don't mean just the last half of the 20th century. I'm talking about the whole century. Because what he did was to introduce the idea of the theater to so many people who otherwise would never have discovered it. He really believed in the power of the theater, free theater. What he established here in New York City, which was so hard to do, but he did it, was to open the doors to so many other cities all across America and to prove to them that it could be done. And they took his lead. And he is responsible for that concept of theater. I didn't know anything about the theater until I was about 16 years old. I was a little hoodlum and a bum, and a teacher reached out to me because she saw something in me that I didn't even know was there. The theater was not part of my life. The point is, that's what Joseph Papp had: the ability, the instinct, and the insight, and the heart to see into people's souls and to believe in the best in them. And he saw that in me. He kept offering things for me to do, and I just kept refusing. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't this enough. It wasn't, maybe I was scared. The point is, he never stopped inviting me. There aren't many people like that, whether it's producers in the theater or just in life. And he had faith in me. And once I realized that whatever he said he wanted me to do was good enough for me, that's when I started doing anything he wanted, because I knew it was right. It's not just a passion for the theater, which we all share. It's not just a love and devotion to the theater, which we all share with Joe, but it's also his great heart. We mustn't forget that. It was his heart that floated us all, that saved us all.
Yes.
Everything I wanted to do, I would take to Joe Papp. I said, I have this play, Miss Margarita's Way. A French man had brought it to me and said, you might like this. He was interviewing me. And I said, I'm fed up with theater. I want to get to the audiences. I've got to get them going. I did Miss Margarita's Way for Joe, and then we moved it to Broadway. He got in such a fight with the playwright. One of the performances, he went to the stage manager at intermission and said, tell Estelle we're not going on anymore. She doesn't need to do the second act. And the stage manager said to Joe, I'm sorry, Joe, I'm not going to do that. This performance is going to finish. She was just this young woman, who had been hired to work at the public theater. So I thought it was very brave of her to do that. And of course, he simmered down then, and we took the thing to Broadway. And the reason we closed on Broadway was that someone threw a tomato at the set. And we then began to think that this was a play that needed to play a certain amount of performances in any given city and then leave before people could come once and think what they wanted to do to Miss Margarita and then come back and do it. We didn't want to give them that chance. But anyway, I toured all over the world with that play.
Hello, it's Nathan Lane, and I'm here to say happy 100th birthday to the late, great, legendary Joseph Papp. He was one of a kind. We could really use someone like Joe Papp today in the theater, for sure. I worked with him in 1984 in the Park. He directed a production of Measure for Measure that I was in, and he was very, very kind to me, and I think I amused him, and wish we had done more things together, because I had such admiration and respect for him and what he had created. Anyway, happy 100th birthday, Joe, wherever you are. And thank you for what you did.
Joe was, he was like a visionary, right? And you walk in and the Shakespeare Theater Festival was everything. To work there was like going to heaven. I remember being scared I came in with Liz Suedos, but Joe was always there. He was always overlooking things and guided us. And we rehearsed for 5 months. That was a luxury that I don't think you find in the theater now. We had 5 months to prepare this amazing piece about children who run away from their homes. I just remember working really hard, and it was all about the work. And that was exciting and thrilling. And I just remember him being with us and treating us so well. He was always fun, dynamic, smart, protective of his actors. It was thrilling to be in the hallways and see people like Christopher Walken. Raul Julia was around at the time, Meryl Streep, so many amazing artists. I just felt very blessed. I just love being an actor and being a performer. You know, it's my soul. And he taught us the purity of that. And that is invaluable. Joe, you changed the world by changing the theater. And you changed me. You helped me get in touch with the purity of the work through the work that you produced. So thank you, Joe, and God bless you. And I hope we see each other again when I'm gone.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Yosl. Happy birthday to you. My fondest memory of you, Joe, is joining you and so many of our colleagues in the early 80s to try to save the Morosco and the Helen Hayes Theater. I had played that theater in Rogers and Hart when Mr. Rogers was still alive, and I had always wanted to play the Morosco, which I never got a chance to do. But I remember demonstrating to save those theaters with Colleen Dewhurst. I also remember her telling me the stories of doing Shakespeare off the back of a truck in your early days and bringing these great classics to the boroughs of New York City. So we thank you, Joe. We thank you for bringing great theater to the city of your birth.
Well, I think it was someday in early April of 1965, because his general manager had hired me to write the biographies of dancers. So I was hired as a sort of a summer temp to do that job. And I came into the office for a while before the dance festival started, and was there when he walked in one morning, and then I was introduced to him. I don't think he had any idea why I was there or whatsoever. He sort of got used to my being there every time he came into the office. He was directing a play at the Delacorte Theater in Central Park at that time, which was Troilus and Cressida. All of a sudden, one Friday, he asked me if I'd be free to take his director's notes at the first preview, which was the following Tuesday. And I was absolutely terrified. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never read the play. I'd not seen any of the rehearsals. And I was just absolutely terrified. And everybody was just tremendously uh, uh, generous and devoted to his ideas about democratizing the arts. So even though I was terrified, I went to the first preview with Joe. Fortunately, I had a weekend before that time to crash read this play with all its, you know, mythic heroes and heroines like Agamemnon and Ajax and so forth and so on, Helen of Troy. The following Tuesday, I went with Joe to the Delacorte Theater, which is the first time I'd ever been to it or seen it before. It was really quite an experience. As we were entering the theater, he suddenly turned around and said, "Why is there such a bottleneck at the gates?" I was like scared. I thought, "Oh my God, maybe this is part of my new job. I'm supposed to do something at the gates. And then after a 30-second delay, I realized he was getting me a note for the house manager. So I wrote it down. I had a pad with me. And so I was just so green at doing this kind of work. And I was very scared at first. But I got kind of used to it. He would whisper his notes constantly throughout the performance. And I thought, this is really amazing. So it was quite beautiful. But that's how I met Joe. That was my first introduction to him.
Joe Papp, in 1975, when I first worked for him, he was a force of nature, an enormous influence on theater in New York. I met Joe a few times auditioning for various things. 75 was the first time I worked with him. Trelawney was one of the absolute peak experiences for me. I'm sure Mandy spoke to you about that because it was his first. He and I were dressing room mates. You know, I was the grizzled old veteran, and he was a young kid who'd quit Juilliard halfway through, and it was Meryl Streep's first New York show. Absolutely, it was an ecstatic experience, and you know, we have Joe to thank. I was having a fantastic time. I was finally in New York. I was in a great gang of mostly unemployed actors, and we happened to be right in the heart of the Joe Papp era. Joe almost defied New York to kill theater, and he was generating so much theater so defiantly, and bit by bit, he became the great feeder mechanism, the great pipeline for Broadway theater to bring it back to life. He was giving playwrights a chance, and playwrights were creating plays. Joe was producing them, and consequently, hundreds and hundreds of actors were put to work. And of course, the big kahuna was a chorus line, completely. It was there because Joe was just creating product. It was just thrilling to finally be invited into that little circle. And I got to experience that just wonderful, heady thrill of free Shakespeare for the best audience in New York. All these people who'd stayed online all day long to come to see Shakespeare in the Park. And Joe's spirit hovered over literally every moment.
Yes.
Yosl Papirofsky.
We are honoring Joe, and I can't believe it's his 100th birthday, because Joe was one of those people that was so huge in our lives. And I think about him certainly every week, if not every day. And therefore, he'll always be 70, which is when I last saw him. He was somebody that I was so frigging lucky to know. And when I got engaged, I went running up to Joe's office, and I went running into his room, and I said, I am marrying Mandy Patinkin. And Joe looked at me and said, you're marrying a true radical, you know. What do you have to say about Joe, hon? Besides that there's never been anybody like him before or since?
Well, he was my friend, first and foremost. He was a father figure, but I remember sitting in his office one day doing a problem I was having with some show we were doing, and his office was lined with all of these awards and, you know, accolades and everything surrounding, and he sat in this chair, and he put the chair up right here and instead of behind the desk, and I sat here, and I was pretty fragile, and I said, you know, I'm trying to just tell you that I just care about you, and I'm just trying to. He said, forget all of this. He said, we're just friends. We're just friends. And I lost it, and he just held me, and I held him. Our connection was absolutely initiated by the theater, but it was really our Jewish heritage that bonded us. He and Gail are our family now, then, and forever. He brought Yiddish into my life. He told me to learn a song for this benefit for the Evo Institute. He sends me over the song called Yosl, 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 mein Chayes geht mir Eisho Sachnir. And I said, I don't know a Yiddish song. So he says, about time you learned one. And I loved it because the song he sent over, as I just said, was Yosl, Yosl, which means Joseph. So he had a healthy ego, my father figure, and he was my father figure. He signed the ketubah at our wedding, and it's just him and Gail dancing at our wedding, and his shirt is soaking wet, and he just celebrated all of our lives. He loved the theater like nobody's business, as we all know. He gave us the Delacorte Theater, he gave us the Public Theater, and he gave us each other because we met through the Public Theater.
Ah, Joe, I will forever be indebted to you for getting me up on that stage in the park to play Beatrice opposite Kevin Kline. Oh, God, the time of my life, even though we were almost electrocuted a few times because we were the most rained out production until then. I know you thought more of me as an actor than you did a Jewish mother because you came to my house for Christmas Eve one night. Oh, and I had gone and made the most wonderful Star of David aluminum foil at the top of this huge tree, and you walked in and looked at it and went, where's the menorah? Anyway, I was a bad Jewish mother. But you forgave me a few years later when you came to Jake's bar mitzvah. You were very happy, as was I. I got a wink and a pat from you, a hug and a kiss, so I know everything was okay. But I will never forget the opportunity you gave me. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You are very missed and very loved. Blythe Danner, bye.
My first encounter with Joseph Papp was not Joseph Papp, the human being, but Joseph Papp, the director. When I was 12 years old, my mother was attending some advanced degree work at NYU, and I was here, and I happened to see a production of Hamlet that he directed that was part of the mobile unit that was performing in Washington Square Park with Cleavon Little. And it was this outrageous thing. And I remember the crowd was incredibly raucous and wild. And I'm 12 and I'm from Frankfort, Kentucky. And it was such an incredibly fun and exhilarating energy to be a part of. So I first met Joe, the director. Then
my connection to Joe Papp came when I finished graduate school. And Joe Papp gave me my first job in the American theater. I'm sure I'm one of 50,000 people working in the American theater who would say that sentence. Joe Papp gave me my first job in the American theater. And I showed up at the Public Theater in my early 20s with a graduate degree in Shakespeare. And he hired me to dramaturg the Shakespeare Marathon. Then we resuscitated the mobile Shakespeare unit that, of course, was central to the beginning of the New York Shakespeare Festival. And that mobile Shakespeare unit's about to celebrate its 10th anniversary. So I feel very connected to the Public Theater specifically, but to the legacy of Joe Papp generally. I remember the handful of times that I got one-on-one time with him. He would just zing out a Shakespeare quote, often punning and sort of wry, but sometimes he would just close his eyes and launch into a Shakespeare speech. But he really believed in this wonderful way that there was no problem in human society that couldn't be made a little bit better by having Shakespeare thrown at it. And he built this institution around that and around the idea that Shakespeare belongs to everybody.
I'd written a play to be done in my dorm called FOB when I was a senior in college. I sent it around, but it was really only 14 months between the time that we did it in my dorm and when it opened at the Public Theater, produced by Joe. The Public had produced a play in which a Caucasian actor was cast in an Asian role. And this led to probably the first yellow-face protests in New York theater history, where the Asian actors of that day, who were few in number and not very powerful, protested outside the Public Theater. And Joe, because a lot of his mission was to create a theater that looked like New York. So Joe ended up inviting the protesters into his office and hiring one of them onto his staff with a brief to find plays for Asian actors. And I think it's a great example of the intersection between political activism and how you change the theater, and that Joe was someone who was interested and willing and enthusiastic to make that change. So I consider myself the beneficiary of affirmative action. And Joe essentially created his own affirmative action program. He opened the door to the public, and I was the person who got to go through that door. And after my play FOB opened at the public in 1980, Joe said to me that he would produce anything I wrote, which was obviously an incredible gift to someone who was 22 years old at that time.
Joseph Papirofsky, AKA Joe Pap, became a first-time father with my birth in January 22nd in 1945. And I was named Susan Margaret Papirofsky. In retrospect, thank goodness Desdemona and Ophelia were off the table. The first time that I met my father, when he was Joseph Papirofsky still, I believe, I was 15. And a meeting had been arranged. I took 2 buses and 2 trains and went to Manhattan, where he was based at the Great Northern Hotel. And I do believe at that time, Gail was sitting at the front desk, Gail Merrifield Pap. And she looked at me and she said, "You are a very brave young lady." And I thought, was that because of the transportation that I had taken and made that long journey? And she said, no, she said, you'll see. And I did, because when I met my father for the first time, he was energized and all over the place with a million things going on. So by the end of that meeting, I felt, oh my gosh, this is King Lear and I'm Cordelia. I'm coming with filial devotion. And everything is going to be all right. I came up with 3 quotes that to me kind of encapsulate the trajectory of my father's life. The first one is, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. William Shakespeare. Our son Jonathan was born, and Joe and Gail were the first, aside from Richard, the first visitors in the hospital. And the relationship between Jonathan and Joe was amazing. No artifice, pure joy, pure connection. He was thrilled and overjoyed.
The title was not one that I chose, but it was called Reflections of a Grandson. And here it is. How I wish I could declare, with the dynamic, imperious, emboldening assurance of my grandfather, Joseph Pap, that my first encounter with a chorus line in April 1990 during the final week of its 15-year Broadway run changed my life. But an artwork so candid, so animated by painful truth, deserves far better than a schmaltzy and disingenuous tribute. So with deep embarrassment, I must confess that the play's initial impact was nothing less than nausea. I was 8 years old and just off an endless car ride, hungry, overheated, and stuffed in an ill-fitting suit, complete with clown red bow tie. My parents and I fell into our seats shortly before curtain, and I fell into a damp, itchy sleep shortly afterward. Legend has it that not even the brilliant finale could stir my limp body.
I was training at the Yale School of Drama. I was working up there with André Serban was doing an evening of Sganarelle pieces, the Moliere farces. And both Wilfrid Leach and Joe Pap came up to see those when we did them. And so they were aware of my work. And I was invited in 1978 to do Bertram and All's Well That Ends Well, directed by Wilfrid Leach at the Delacorte, summer of 1978. Wonderful way to start a career in New York. And came back the next summer, was doing Shakespeare in the Park, various parts in Raoul Julia's Othello. And that was my start in New York. And it was, I continued to work at the Public Theater at Joe's behest. And I, as with many others, found a community and support at the Public Theater because of Joseph Papp. Joe, Joe was a fan of my work. I was working at the Public, a number of times, and he had invited me and said, "What? Asked what I would be interested in doing." And I said, "Well, I have a friend, Lewis Black, who's a playwright and a stand-up comic, and we've been working together doing a show that called The Laundry Hour." And I believe Lewis has the story. Joe did not know who Lewis was. Nobody knew who Lewis was at that point. We had just we were fresh off the boat, and Joe just to before he committed to the show, asked Lou to come in and do a set for him, which he did over lunch. Which Lewis said was one of the strangest things he's ever done, doing a set of stand-up just for Joe Papp. But apparently he did it well enough so that Joe let us do the show.
Excellent. So we're here with Barry Newport, the artistic director of Gable Stage, and we're talking about an upcoming world premiere production of Joe Papp at the Ballroom. And so Barry, can you tell us, first of all, what was your knowledge about Joe Papp before you ever became part of Gable Stage? What was your history with Joe, if any? What did you know about him? Tell us what you thought.
Well, certainly as a young producer and theater maker, Joe Papp was presented to me early on as an iconic figure in American theater. And I cannot remember when I became obsessed with his life, but it was, I feel like I must have been in my 20s when I was still so idealistic and kind of blue-eyed about how to make theater accessible for all. And of course, Papp's driving force in his own philosophical belief about theater's power in a community and power for humanity really had to do with providing theater like the public library, which in concept makes a lot of sense and is a lot more to the European standard of communities that are built with theater companies as central to what makes those communities communities. But the idea that like a library, a place of learning, like a school, a place of education, like a courthouse, a place of law, that there is a center for creativity makes a ton of sense to me too. The 9/11 papers start with, "We never could have imagined." And that's our job, isn't it? It's to give people a place to imagine. Losing one's imagination is a terrible, terrible thing. And it's central to my belief system also, which is why I have dedicated my life to making plays for communities and bringing people together. I believe in it to my core. But in looking back at this book, which I remember spending a summer just obsessing over and like looking at my like crazy notes in the margins, and I remember spending a whole summer being absolutely turned on by not only theater for all and the notion of free theater for all, but in Joe Papp's belief in action, which is as a Jewish person, also core, I think, to what it is to practice Judaism. The act of doing, of course, to act is to do, and my whole philosophy on directing any play is about what are we doing. So
you're probably too young to have actually gone to the early productions of Shakespeare in the Park and the Delacorte, and then eventually the actual public theater on Lafayette Street. But since you've been in this business most of your life, can you talk for a second about the plays that came out of the public theater system, out of the Shakespeare in the Park system, that most affected you, that most influenced you, the ones, that you always, were blown away by, wanted to do, and eventually did? Because we all know that, they developed some of the greatest theater that this country has ever seen.
Sure. I mean, as a very young person, and I grew up right outside of New York. I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, but we moved around a lot, my family. And I was always really interested in what people in rural communities did for professional theater, which is not the question you asked me, but which is also central to Joe Papp's belief system in terms of public theater and making theater accessible to all people. But in terms of just turning me on as a very young person to kind of the most basic canon of popular American theater, my parents took me at a very young age because they knew I was a young actor and that I should know a chorus line. And my parents, of course, grew up in a time when Broadway musicals were the albums that you had at home, that you were listening to along with, the Beatles. And so my parents took me to, like, one of my very first Broadway shows was a chorus line. And I remember seeing at a very young age a production of Hair at the Bridgeport, what's it called? In Bridgeport, Connecticut. And later I saw a fabulous production of Hair at in Melbourne, Australia, which was it's a universal story, of course, and I'm like dying to go over to the Oslo to see their production. I mean, Hair's one of those musicals that I just get nuts when I hear the music. I just lose my mind. But it's the public's really other work, their work with incarcerated people, their work on the street, that really made the most difference to how I produce theater and where I've produced theater and why I produce theater.
Do you feel that young people today or theater people today know who Joe Papp was and what he did and how he revolutionized what we know of as theater today, conceptually, the workshop concept? All of that was really developed under him. Do you think he's a known commodity anymore?
It's true. I mean, when he was alive, he was kind of everywhere. And what was great about the commercial work that he ended up doing is he was able to, most people never go to theater. It's like 2%, maybe it's 3% of every community actually attends theater. We are in such a niche little bubble, and it's easy for us as theater makers to be surrounded by theater lovers and for us to assume that everybody knows what we're talking about, when the reality is that we have a tiny little spotlight on us over in the corner. And most people have no idea how we bake the cake. A lot of people have no idea why these theaters are nonprofits. And so therefore, most people now probably have no idea who Joe Papp was, whether they're inside or outside of our industry. But there was a time when people such as my parents, who are not theater people, who are regular citizens, were extremely familiar and impressed and revolutionized by Joe Papp. He was of an era where he was such a personality himself that he was everywhere. He was on popular television, shows. his work was celebrated by popular culture and theater culture. I don't know if young people in arts and culture remember a time when the work that was produced in any other way, you know?
Were you aware of the concert that he gave at the ballroom in 1978?
I wasn't. I was 2 years old. But no, I wasn't. Not until you brought it to my attention. I thought it was really, really fascinating.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know about it either.
Really?
Yeah, I had no idea until I met with Joe's daughter, Susan, who said, "Hey, did you ever hear my dad's concert in 1978 at the ballroom?" I'm like, I don't even know.
Now, Avi, was it one concert or was it a series of
It was a
concerts?
series of concerts during those 5 days.
I see.
Yeah, it was September 28th to October 1st of 78 at the ballroom. He did 6 concerts, I think. And it was obviously sold out. It was a very small house. It was a little cabaret. And his friends and theater people came, and it was like a big deal because he had never really taken the stage as a solo artist. And it turned out he had this, not only the amazing story to tell, but he had this beautiful voice. And so he sang his favorite songs, told the story of his life, and then that was lost until Susan played it for me, and then Gail sent it to me and gave me the permission to start turning it into something. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to turn it into a theatrical, piece. I've done it as a concert, but I've never been able to do it as a theater piece.
And I think I told you, like, I really love the script. I actually spoke to Eleanor this morning, and I just think you guys have done a fantastic job using all of Joe Papp's words, right? They're all from his lips.
Yeah, 98% is
98%,
actually
okay.
Joe, and we had to take a couple of little liberties just to make it work structurally. Yeah,
I love the structure of it. I think the structure of it is just brilliant, and it's a story on so many different levels. Of course, it's such an American story, creating something out of nothing just with dreams and chutzpah. It's very much a Jewish story. And I didn't really know very much about him as a Jewish man. And it's 100% a theater story.
Great. One of the things, that I've been shocked by, really, is the fact that if you go to theater departments around the country, and I've worked with several, they don't teach a Joe Papp course. And so do you think, how would you feel about, or what do you feel about the idea that this piece opens up a door to, reintroducing Joe, not only to the theater world and those who may not remember him, obviously those who do, those who may not, but also the concept of evolving it into some kind of a academic program to bring back that amazing story.
Yeah, I don't know, hearing you talk, it doesn't surprise me. Nobody taught me how to produce. I never took a producing class. So much of life is, what is the quote? Is it the Thomas Edison quote? Inspiration, imagination, and sweat and common sense, and what I love about Joe Papp's life is that it was all based on common sense. He just put 1 and 1 together and made 600, and then took the 600 and made $1 million.
Right. And yet the world at large, and especially the governmental, political world, said, "What do you mean 1 and 1 equals 2? No, it doesn't. You can't do that.
Yeah,
you can't
exactly.
do free Shakespeare in the park. What do you mean free?"
Right. Exactly. I mean, what I would say is, sure, like absolutely, turning it into an academic opportunity is kind of a no-brainer. But what I would encourage people even more so to do is to just do it. The Nike school, just do it. If Joe Papp's life teaches nothing else, it's what you just said. It's one man in the face of a behemoth, which is the government or the city or the mass of ignorance. And he, through his own sheer will, educated, gathered, emancipated, and made a huge difference to New York City's economy, made a huge difference to popular culture, and brought us to this moment today where theaters like Gable Stage exist. I was saying to someone this morning that I love the fact that it's a world premiere, and I love the fact that that we threw our hat in the ring, and that it's premiering here, not only because I do think it's a really strong piece, but also because it illuminates what I believe, my own belief system, which is my driving force for even doing what I'm doing in the first place, which is producing theater by and for a community at a professional level. So thanks, Avi, and thanks, Joe Papp. I'm thrilled that you've brought Eleanor Risa into my life. Eleanor and I are, as you had predicted, I believe, we're fast old friends, fast old new friends. And it's really thrilling to have her, you, Lauren Halpern designing the set. I was hired to scale up Gable Stage, and this is the first of many ways that we're doing that.
Bravo. Thank you, Barry.
Thanks.
Barry. Eleanor.
There are too many times when he just simply came to our rescue. There was one time in particular when I was doing The Master and Margarita, very difficult thing. We had very little time. And at one point, when he had come to see how the rehearsal was going, I broke down and I was weeping because I didn't know what I was doing. And he again came to me and put his arms around me and comforted me. And when I said to Andre Serban, because he didn't know why I was weeping, he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, I don't know what I'm doing. And Andre said, "Don't tell anyone, but neither do I." And Joe just roared. He supported us both. He said, "Now the truth. None of us knows what we're doing. That's why we're doing it." All I know was you always knew that Joe was there for you. And I can say that even after all these years, it's still there. He had that kind of influence and still does. I believe that sincerely. Well, when I won the Academy Award, he invited me to his office and gave me a facsimile of Shakespeare's plays, and he inscribed it. And he took me in his arms and he congratulated me. But he said, "Do me a favor. Don't let it go to your head." I said, "It's too late, Joe." He said, "You mean you're not going to work for me anymore?" I said, "I'll work for you till I die."
But I think the story of how I got together with Joe is kind of amazing. It started out with the Sunday New York Times once again. And the editor who I had been working with at the Arts and Leisure section said, you know, you really could do another institution. I had done the New York Philharmonic. And why don't you do the New York Shakespeare Festival? So I said, fine. And I thought, oh, great. I'm going to spend another 6 months going to the theater now, which I did. And it was a great year. It was 1976, 77. I had spent, I don't know, at least 2 months researching, you know, going through their archive and sitting in on all these rehearsals and sitting in on all these shows and meeting all the people who worked there. And the last day of the research, I was supposed to spend a day in the life of Joe Papp. So I was going to shadow him from 9 o'clock in the morning until he finished work. So I did that. And at 9 o'clock at night, he said, why don't you come home and have dinner with us? And I said, okay. You know, I mean, so I go home to his apartment with him. His wife, Gail, opens the door. I look into the living room and there are candles on the table and flowers, and it was their first wedding anniversary. And I was just so embarrassed. I thought, get me out of here. And they both said, no, 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 you must come celebrate with us. And that's how I met Joe Papp.
Through the Troilus and Cressida, the problems he had with the play, which he would discuss with me a little bit afterwards. We got to talking on a more personal level, and then he took me to see the mobile theater that was touring the various boroughs at summer, and he's producing Henry V on the mobile theater with Robert Hooks, a black actor, and a black cast. So I got a sense of his reaching out to the neighborhoods, and families would come and children would come. The audience was just terrific. They got all the humor, much better than a Broadway audience, I have to tell you that. And they were totally with the characters, completely invested in the reality of the play to them. And it was a great audience to be with. So that was another part of my summer's education that I got after meeting Joe for the first time. And the winter work was primarily going out to schools, the school productions that were done in school auditoriums. That kept everyone busy in the hotel office suite, even though we didn't have a theater that we performed in during those autumn and winter months. So that was kind of the orientation of my first full year at the, it's called the New York Shakespeare Festival at that time.
We were just doing what we believed in. And when he ran Lincoln Center, which, you know, he did for a while, in fact, I think he directed the first play done there, and I think I was in it. And it was so badly received that in the intermission on the matinee, on the second weekend, somebody walked down to the front of the stage and said, this theater will be closed from this moment on because of this terrible production. But of course, we went right on with it.
Shakespeare in the Park would never have happened without Joe. It wouldn't have been free without Joe. Joe Papp is the only person in the New York landscape who ever went head to head with Robert Moses and won. This is the kind of thing he did, and it just electrified New York. He helped bring Broadway back to life, and that helped bring New York back to life. I mean, that's how much of a force this man was. And it was theater that did it. I mean, he was impulsive. He was irascible. He could be a total pain in the ass. The conventional wisdom was you either loved him or you hated him. I loved him. It's really important to know his history long before the public theater. For that, when he was a floor manager of CBS television, and one of the few people who actually overcame the blacklist just out of pure bullheadedness. And then presto, like a wildcatter, he created a chorus line and struck gold. But I was intensely aware of the effect he was having on the entire theater scene in New York, all through the 70s and 80s.
I had an idea when I became a mother of my second son that nobody was talking about this experience in the culture. And so I went to Joe and Gail and I told them my idea. And Joe listened to it and said, I mean, here was the preeminent person in the theater. And he listened to Catherine Grody's idea and said, okay, if you write it, I'll produce it. Boom, like that. And I looked at him and said, Joe, I need a place to write. I can't work at home. And he gave me a desk and a Selectrix in the hallway of the Public Theater. And it became one of the best things of my life.
I forgot a big part of Joe's story too. My story with Joe was I was doing, he came over for Shabbos dinner, and I was thinking of doing concerts. Because I'd worked with Paul Ford for a year on developing material. We put out our first album, then was like, what do we do with the music? So he comes over around that time for a Shabbos dinner, and the Schuberts and everybody said, well, you're from Broadway, you need to do it with 50-piece orchestra and dancing girls.
Orchestra, and that was bad enough.
It was 50. Okay. And anyway, I wasn't comfortable with that. And Joe sits at the Shabbos table and he says, listen, you didn't ask me. He says, here's what you do. You play Leontes in the Winter's Tale at the Ansbacher Theater. You do it 8 times a week. You got Monday nights off. On your Monday nights off, you got X amount of Monday nights, and you can try your little music thing. So I went out there the first Monday night with Paul Ford, and we did it.
Found his true skin.
And I'll never forget, Joe came into the dressing room, and I was looking, and he comes in, I'm looking at him in the mirror, and I'm seeing him in the mirror, and he stands behind me, and he says, well, I guess you like doing that. And I said, yeah, I had a good time. And he said, listen, you're going to always need to do this. You're going to need to do this music. And you're going to need to work on the classics. And you're going to need to do them both your whole life. And I've let the classics slip a little bit, but Joe, I'll get back to it.
Okay, if you said that.
I said it, okay.
You better start learning Lear now.
Okay, but anyway.
And he was one of the least snobby, well-known people I've ever known. He was truly not a snob.
And then he gave me Yiddish because he said it was my job to learn this music. Which I understood what he meant was I have the privilege of getting to sing, and it's my job to get at the end of the line of all these people that have been passing this language on, who we're a beautiful language, poetic language that was they tried to decimate it through the Holocaust, and they failed, and it lives, and we made our Yiddish album, and it all because of Joe.
The Jewish aspect, when Jonathan was growing up a bit, he was taking a class and they were reading Goldilocks and the Three Bears in Yiddish. And every pre-Shabbat, Jonathan and Joe would have a conversation and they would speak a little Yiddish. And it was became a tradition in the household, which was quite lovely.
And so he taught us about what our service was, that theater was really an act of civic duty and civic service, and not firstly something that was about our own personal stardom ever. You know, I would say that to Mr. Papp that today, especially, his spirit is very much alive in the activism that we see in the theater today, which is essential. So he really taught us, I think he brought to the fore what the theater in a democratic society, and certainly New York, but anywhere, is really for and about. Thank you and bless you. And we are doing our passionate best to continue your legacy and also to continue it on for the emerging generation, because that's a huge responsibility, I think, that he also taught us, who will be shepherding the theater going forward. So thank you.
He believed in people. He believed in community. He believed in supporting art and artists. And it created generations of successful artists as a result. The decades that Joe was a formative force in the theater in New York were just incredible longevity. The opportunity, the incredible support, the visibility that was offered everybody got an opportunity to show their best stuff and to be exposed to the New York audience and beyond. There is, what greater place to start? I know of none. He's a father figure. He was that to so many people, to so many artists, unmistakably. And that kind of love and support. Again, just the gratitude for all the people, all the artists, all the actors, directors, designers who came through and just had the opportunities and the exposure that Joe was able to offer. Gail, I just want to extend my love and warm wishes to you, and as we celebrate 100th birthday.
You know, at one point, we were in Poland, actually, of odd places. We were there, and at one point he said to me, he said, learn a couple of soliloquies from Hamlet, and I'll direct you in Hamlet. And I was going, that will not be happening. I will not be doing Hamlet. Thank you, but no. And then it was, and then I remember this sort of incredibly intense and lovely and melancholy moment in that same office where I first met him. And this was when he was very ill, but I sort of knew that he was ill, but I didn't really know. And he was talking about his career and his accomplishments, and it was like maybe 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was just talking and sort of reminiscing and being both humble and proud of his accomplishments. And it was this very sort of wonderfully magical moment, I remember very specifically. You know, I feel deeply honored to have worked with him, to have known him, to have called him a friend, to have called him a mentor. And his passion and his ferocity is an example that guided me when I was at the Public for 12 years as a producer, and inspires us all. Thank you, Joe. I'm so proud I got to know you. Deep love. Thank you, George.
I do have a story which you may or may not want to include. I've told it before, and Gail knows about it. I think Gail's fine with this story. Joe took me into his office, and I was 21, and he was Joe Papp. And of course, I wanted him to like me. And so he said, you know, I like this play, but I have some notes. And he gave me some notes, and I didn't actually agree with his notes, but I, you know, had enough sense not to necessarily say that. And Joe said, okay, well, go, you know, do another draft and I'll decide if I'm going to produce it. And so I went home, I waited about 3 weeks, and I sent him the exact same script back. And about 10 days later, the phone rang and it was Joe. And he was like, okay, the script's great now, we're going to do it. And that's how I got my first production. I hope that I've been able to make you proud in the intervening years. I have a career because you gave me this opportunity, and you nurtured me in a way that hardly any writer gets to have this chance. And I hope I've taken that opportunity and done something good with it subsequently.
I saw him as a poet and a pugilist. He was a fighter, and he had wit, he had grit, he was a warrior, but a force of nature. And he was streetwise, and he was a problem solver, and he was a kid of the streets, and all that stuff. I looked upon him as being flawed but fabulous and perfectly imperfect. And that was fine. That was fine with me. I was very proud of his humanitarian efforts. It meant a lot to me that he was involved with the Vietnam War. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite pictures is Joe being carted away to jail, and his jailmate was Dr. Spock. I was proud of his humanitarian efforts on behalf of the Joe Papp Children's Humanity Fund for Tzivos Hashem, which brought medical attention, I believe, to the Ukraine. And I also liked his involvement with the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding with Rabbi Mark Schneier to improve Black-Jewish relations, and that still exists to this very, very day. So I did feel a source of pride in everything that he was, everything that he did believe in, and he saw through. Yes. Strength does not come from winning. Your struggles develop your strengths. When you go through hardships and decide not to surrender, that is strength. Mahatma Gandhi.
After my grandfather's untimely passing in October 1991, my fascination with his public life increased. Who was this man who could pack a theater with mourners, who could compel eulogies from Meryl Streep and the mayor of New York? That he could captivate with the vigor of his brilliance, the depth of his charm, and the ease of his tongue was clear even to my young eye. But there was more to this mock-stern intelligence, to this dynamo who claimed to converse with heavenly bodies when I wasn't looking, and who had introduced me to the joys of the omelet and sushi. I acquired a working knowledge of the basics, the dirt-poor childhood with uncomprehending Jewish Polish immigrant parents, the Julius Caesar monologue spoken in the stairwells of his family's Brooklyn tenement house to an audience of none, the battles with Robert Moses over unlicensed use of New York property to stage free Shakespeare, the bold, controversial refigurings of these century-old texts, and the journey from McCarthy-era communist to outspoken critic of Soviet policy. This record I could recite with confidence and, as I grew, pride for his Shakespeare work and his dogged service to the universality of high art. But a chorus line still hardly registered with this perversely Broadway indifferent child. Sorry, Mom. Remarkably, it was in 1997 that a chorus line first sank beneath my skin. I was a freshman in high school, in the wicked throes of adolescence, and had just recently decided to be a professional writer. Or rather, it had felt as though I had little to say about the decision, so I had been fated to it by an unobserved power. Hero or villain, I guess the jury is still out.
I never saw him back down to anybody, for size or shape or power, on any level, physical, political. He never, ever backed down.
He was kind of an art Rocky. You wanted to cheer when he got up and screamed for money, or when he fought Robert Moses.
There was something, I think, too, that he loved about the struggle, loved about the scrabbling.
The theatre was his pen. It was the means by which he wrote his commentary on what was going on in the society, and we were the ink.
If the library had not been public, he would never have discovered Shakespeare.
I am a proud New Yorker, and when I was growing up, Joe Papp was this larger-than-life figure on the front lines of every issue I held dear. Somebody I greatly admired. But my first career was actually not in film. I was a young idealist and social activist and worked in electoral politics. My first boss, former Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman. While I was working for Liz on her campaign staff,
I organized a benefit. It was an evening of works by women, about women, and it featured many of Liz's friends, Susan Sontag, John Guare, the late, great Ruby Dee, and of course, Joe Papp. And Liz was Susan B. Anthony, Susan Sontag was Virginia Woolf, John Guare was Sojourner Truth. Anyway, Joe Papp called me and he wanted to read from The Merchant of Venice. And I pointed out, The Merchant of Venice is by a man, but he argued, he was a passionate man, as everyone knows, that Portia was the strongest woman in all of literature. I was a young political operative at the time. What did I know from theater? But I fought him. And in indignation, he said to me, well, then you find something. So I spent 3 days in Applause bookstore, and I found a book on the life of Emma Goldman. And I called him up and I suggested that he read from Emma Goldman. And the first time I met Joe Papp, he was Emma Goldman. Many years later, I then decided to leave electoral politics and to be political in a new way. I found my voice in film, and I realized that, to my amazement, no one had made a film about Joe Papp. So I spent several years doing research, and then at a certain point, I reached out to Karen. And
well, research is essential, and getting to know him, as Tracy said, she spent months and years on that, and I dove in and did the same. And initially we started out with a list of the people who were part of his universe, and gradually got to know Joe himself. And I think the centerpiece of the film is exploring the nature of being an outsider and what that means in terms of being an American, and what it means in terms of being an immigrant, in terms of what it means in being Jewish. And I think we're celebrating his journey and the difficulties that he faced. And I think the hinge on which the play turns was when he finally admitted his own background, when he came to terms with owning himself. And I think that talks to the arts as the vehicle. It's the tank that Lee Brewer described, but it's also, it's the key to now. And that's why I think, as Tracy said just a minute ago, this is a time more than ever that we need this.
He produced my next 3 plays off Broadway. In my early 20s, had an experience that nobody gets to have, really. And, people often talk about Joe being kind of a surrogate father. And I think he did like to do that. And I think, I'm a Chinese son. I'm like a good son. So, we got along quite well. He was also attracted to the notion that I was writing a lot of immigrant stories, and, FOB, the term fresh off the boat for new Chinese immigrants. Joe often related that to his term greenhorn, which he associated with Jewish immigrants and his parents' generation that came to America. So I think we had that bond as well. And that was all before my Broadway debut with M. Butterfly. And by the time M. Butterfly became a hit, Joe was already sick. Joe took me aside and put his arm around me, and he said, you broke all the rules. And he was so proud because he felt like M. Butterfly was a play that had broken all the rules and still succeeded on Broadway. I still felt that kind of paternal approval from him that I had written a play that had broken all the rules and succeeded. So I considered the public to be my primary artistic home, was brought into the organization by Joe, the place where I feel most comfortable doing my work, and a theater who even post Joe relates to its mission, continues the legacy that Joe started, and it's the place that I feel most comfortable.
The beauty about Joseph Papp, and I was very, very young. We all were very young, who were involved with Hair initially. Hair was going to be the premier show to open up Joe Papp's Public Theater, and I've got to be honest, I had a crush on him. I did. I was like, I just thought he was the coolest thing ever. But when I talk about the accessibility of Joseph Papp, and I called Joseph Papp on the phone. Hi, Gail, it's Janelle Allen. She's like, hi. I said, I want to talk to Joe. with the chutzpah of somebody who's, young. And he got on the phone. And so he said, hi, how are you? I said, well, the reason I'm calling is because someone in the show with me would like to audition for this Two Gentlemen of Verona. And he couldn't get an audition, so I'm calling you to see if you can give him one. And he was like, okay, but would you like to audition? And I was like, well, okay, because I auditioned, and I hear my mother on the phone in the morning, and she says, what? Who is this? Joe Papp, what? You want to talk to who? And I'm hearing this and I'm thinking, what the? So I get up and I get the phone. Hi, this is Joseph Papp. And I'm like, nah. Yeah, it is. It's Joe. How are you, Sylvia? And that's how I knew I got the part in Two Gentlemen of Verona. Joe Papp called me and called me Sylvia. I guess we were like the little show that could. And it just became, this great success. Joe stood up and he said, we're taking this show to Broadway. Two Gentlemen was the first actual public theater production that moved to Broadway as a public theater production. Joe, I honor you. I respect you. I absolutely am so grateful to you. And I owe a great deal to you. And like anything else, hindsight is 20/20, and I wish I could have told you those things when I could actually be standing in front of you and telling you those things.
I came to admire the way Joe functioned. He kept you on your toes in an interesting way. He also has a great sense of humor, which I just loved. That was tremendous fun. It was during this phase in the hotel office suite that Joe began to formulate his ideas for a public theater that would be year-round in a dedicated building of some sort. He felt the need to be in touch with new work. There was a board member that asked, well, how are you going to do this, Joe? And he said, well, I've got to find a place. So the next week, no one asked how we planned to, fund it. This board was interesting. I left everything up to Joe with his remarkable resourcefulness and his fantastic energy. And I remember one morning Joe said, I don't have any money to do this. I said, well, I kind of thought so. He said, I just want to do it. And he was off to look at more places. That was the beginning of the idea of the public theater.
I remember one show I did a show once. It was an experimental piece, and I'll tell you, we got some of the worst reviews in the history of the theater. Well, the day that the reviews came out, Joe came to talk to us for the second performance and said, don't you even think about those reviews. They don't know what they're talking about. This is a great show, and I believe in you. You should believe in you. Go out and just do it. I knew he called critics to tell them that they were wrong. How many producers go to bat for you that way? Joe he just was a caring, wonderful man. There was one instance during the great production of Midsummer Night's Dream. There was one moment when the donkey's head I was wearing was just giving me a terrible rash. And I kept complaining, but nothing was being done about it. And so I finally said, I'm going to go on without the ass's head. I'm going to wear a sign on my head saying donkey. And he came to me and said, Murray, are you sure you want to go out with a sign that says donkey? He said, because if you do, then I'm going to have to do the role. Well, of course I had to do it, naturally.
He asked me to come in his office, which was kind of surprising. And he told me that he had just been told that he was going to die. And I was very shocked and surprised and was at a complete loss for words. I did not know enough to be grateful for all of the opportunities he offered me. I did not understand that he had done that for me until I got very much older. And by then he was gone. I'm a very insular person, I'm an old New Englander back to 1630, and we don't hardly talk to each other even, never mind other people. He was an extraordinary individual, and it almost never happens that someone so full of a talent for making theater, not for acting, if you saw his nightclub act, it was fun. He liked to do that, but he just knew what to say, what to do, how to bring people in to support him. It was amazing to watch him in action with a crowd, with a room full of people who had the ability to join him financially and support his work. It was just amazing to see the gift he had to just blossom, to see what he was capable of doing and the wonderful vision that he had for the theater. He was unique, and I feel so lucky. Lots of times I wish I'd been born in another era, but I feel so lucky to have been a part of his life always.
Oh, God. I think he would have been he would have been so furious about the state of this country's politics. Joe chained himself to the Morosco theater seat when they were about to tear it down. Nobody had the kind of integrity Joe did. People talk about integrity and risk, easily. But Joe was really when they asked him to sign that stupid NEA grant and piece of paper under Reagan saying that he wouldn't do anything offensive in the arts. Joe refused to sign it, and he lost his whole costume and shop.
And what did he say to the House Un-American Activities people when they brought him up?
Do you remember the quote?
Yeah, you remember what I didn't say.
Oh, you remember what I didn't say.
You remember
That's
what
right.
I didn't say. Joe, at this time, as a 100-year-old man, I am certain would be in the room fighting for morality, ethics, humanity, the end to systemic racism.
Just the simple truth.
The simple truth. And Joe would figure out a way to make people understand what the truth is versus my truth, his truth, their truth, and their truth. And all this complicated rhetoric about truths as opposed to what is the truth. And Joe would figure out the way to make people understand what the true truth is for survival.
Yeah.
And so Joe will never die.
No, and it's like the Hammerstein quote we love so much. As long as one person remembers you,
as long as there's one person on earth who remembers you, it isn't over.
Yeah.
And Joe is alive, and we are blessed to have had him in our lives, and his memory lives on forever, and his life lives on forever, and his actions live on forever. He is our true inspiration. God bless you, Joe.
Happy birthday, Joe.
Happy birthday.
There are stars whose radiance is visible on Earth, though they have long been extinct. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, even though they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. They light the way for humankind. Hannah Senish.
I came to this production with some reluctance. I was ashamed that Joe Pap's grandson cared so little and knew even less about this, the peak of his popular legacy. What I discovered with the chorus line, however, has marked me forever. The show, it seemed then and seems still to me, is about the bravery and fragility of the artist's dream. It reminds us of the precious and painful wages of love, of following our most desperate and deeply held dreams to their sometimes sublime, sometimes fruitless ends. And best, it does so without sentimentality. Paul, the tenderest, most vulnerable character, is struck with the cruelest fate. A chorus line, finally, is a touchstone to anyone in the creative arts, whether writer, dancer, or impresario. Our suffering may take different forms: carpal tunnel syndrome, discarded manuscripts, swollen ankles, and blown auditions, but we must hold our integrity intact. My grandfather's spirit, and this, the show that so wholly embodies it, is with me always, as comfort, companion, cheer, and even scold. Go on and suffer, it commands us. You have no other choice.
Joe, it was almost like he went searching for the things that no one had dealt with before and that really had to be dealt with, or we are not a democratic society. I've always said, you know, the great artistic directors are the men and women who are ambitious for the institution rather than for themselves. That was Joe. He didn't see himself as this grand artist. He saw himself as a kind of field general for the public theater, and just getting people to think creatively, getting them to do things that they didn't know they were capable of doing. I mean, that's why Hair happened. That's why a chorus line happened. I'll tell you a wonderful story. Back in the mid-70s, I heard tell of this great show downtown that had been developed in workshop and was being put on at the Newman Theater. It was in previews and everybody's talking about it. You gotta see this show. And I went down and saw it at the Newman, and sure enough, it was completely phenomenal. It was a sort of game changer musical created under the auspices of the public theater. That was a chorus line. Well, the same thing happened a couple of years ago. Everybody in town was talking about this thing that's in previews now that had been worked out in workshop at the public theater. And it's at the Newman. You got to see it before it opens because it's going to change everything. Well, that was Hamilton. And I saw it down there in previews too. It was exactly the same experience. And that was, you know, Oscar Eustis was in charge and overseeing Hamilton, but he was following the Joe Papp playbook. Oscar Eustis, by the way, is the perfect successor to Joe Papp. Like Joe, he has this incredible commitment to creating theater that has a sense of social justice, that is, he's cultivating new audiences and new playwrights, of a huge spectrum of ethnicities and colors. This is another template that Joe created. Joe, we owe just about everything to you. Everybody always talks about how the theater will never die or the theater is dead. The theater was on its deathbed in the 1970s, and Joe brought it back to life. And I would thank him. I would thank him for keeping things alive.
So, Eleanor Risa.
Avi Hoffman.
I am so grateful and so excited to be able to work with you on the world premiere production of Joe Papp at the Ballroom. But what I'd like you to tell us is, what did you know about Joe Papp when you were growing up in New York and started getting involved in the theater? What did the name Joe Papp mean to you, if anything?
Well, it did mean some things, not when I was a child, certainly, but like in college days and post-college days. And there was a off Broadway world. And it was an exciting world, and it was a world that spoke to the times that we were living in and spoke to events that were happening and that were reflecting on my own life. And so it was Joe Papp was a symbol of an exciting time, a creator, someone who um, a leader who was creating theater for us, whoever us was. I mean, I think the first thing I ever saw of his was the basic training of Pablo Hummel.
Wow.
With Al Pacino. And it was about the war, and it was about the unfortunate life of a soldier. And I mean, I don't remember it exactly, but that's what I remember about it. And it was contemporary and moving as all heck.
What, can you mention a few other shows that you remember seeing and being influenced by at the public?
For colored girls who have, I don't know the exact title, but for colored girls I saw it on Broadway, not at the public, and that blew me away. I can't remember how many women of color reciting poetry and the lives that they I mean, I'd never seen anything like that. It gave voice and expression to these women who I hadn't known could have any, who had not been given an opportunity to have them. And it was beautiful poetry, and I remember the women in different colored dresses that flowed, and it was just beautiful. I saw Two Gentlemen of Verona. And I mean, I can't, and Pirates of Penzance, of course, with Kevin Kline and
yeah,
Linda Ronstadt. I mean, Linda, to say, Linda Ronstadt was coming to the park to free Shakespeare in the park. Linda Ronstadt for free doing Mabel, and George, I'm forgetting his name too, who was the modern major general. I mean, it was a world. He opened the door. These musicals and plays opened the door to a world, like to a magic world, to a world that was on one hand familiar and on the other hand exotic. And also reflected the city that I lived in. Gay, straight, black, white, Hispanic, Jewish, non-Jewish.
Well, speaking of Jewish, you and I have a very unique distinction that he rediscovered his love of Yiddish language and found our little production of Songs of Paradise and decided to move it to the public theater. And that was in 1989, in January. So I'm curious if you have any specific memories of that amazing thing that happened to us. And it was very unique. We did a show in Riverdale and suddenly Joe Papp's there. And a month later, we're opening at the public theater for an extended run that's extended twice. What memories do you have of that?
My memory stinks in general, but except about, I don't know about what, but but I remember feeling so cynical when we were doing it in Riverdale, and you and your mother, uh, some version of either of you said, Joe Papp is coming, and I thought, yeah. Sure. I mean, I'll do this anyway, Avi. I know Joe Papp is not coming to the Riverdale Y to see this little 5-character play, this romp. But he did. He did. And then when he said he's bringing it to the public, again, I thought, yeah, sure, he's bringing it to the public. And that kind of sums up my I didn't believe it, really. I didn't believe he would do that. I didn't believe it was happening. It would happen. And to be at the public, at the Shiva Theater, to walk every day through the magnificent lobby, past the terrific hallway monitors, the men and women who, hey, how are you? Hi, Eleanor. Hi, hi, Kevin Kline. Hi, Eleanor. Hi, Meryl Streep. Hi, Eleanor.
Mandy Patinkin.
Hi, Mandy Patinkin. Hi, Christopher Reeve
Right.
of blessed memory. Hi, hi, Eleanor. That my name to these fabulous workers there was like, hi, Chris Reeve. Hi, Eleanor Risa. So that was sort of great. And really, I have to say what stands out most is creating it with you, Avi. I remember most our tech rehearsals, more than I remember the performances or after performances, oddly. I remember the process most of all. And I know Joe was there. I didn't, I think I was really in awe and never really engaged with him in any deep way. He was too big, and not that wasn't his doing, but that was my feeling of his awesomeness.
Speaking of working together, so now we have this incredible opportunity. Had you heard about this concert that he had given in 1978 in any way, shape, or form?
I heard about the concert vaguely, but and what does stay in my mind is the poster. The poster of Joe Papp at the ballroom. The posters in general for the public theater were so iconic. I see that, but I not much else.
Right. I knew nothing about it until his daughter Susan. We were sitting in her apartment, and she said, "Did you ever hear the concert my dad gave?" I'm like, "No," and she played it for me on a cassette. And I was so blown away that I begged her to let me record it on a DVD, on a CD, so I could have a file of it and then transcribe it. Gail then sent me the CD. I was able to transcribe it, and now here we are creating a world premiere theatrical piece. So can you talk for just a second about the creative process that we are working on together, both you as adapter and director, on creating this life of Joe that people don't know?
Well, that's been a really interesting, challenging thing, because Joe Papp at the ballroom, the event itself in 1978, everybody knew who Joe Papp was. You could have had Joe Papp at the ballroom reading a phone book, and people would have been really interested because he had such breadth and depth and he was such a mensch to boot, that it sang itself, you could say. But doing it now, when many people don't know who Joe Papp was, and don't know what Joe Papp did, and don't know why Joe Papp was such an important man and human, and contributor and shoulder that we stand on was the challenge of this piece. And so we didn't want it to be a kind of biopic thing. We wanted it to be a play for first of all, something with a beginning, middle, and an end, something where something develops, where the character develops. And that was a challenge. But I think I'm pleased with the script. I'm pleased with my leading actor. We have a fabulous design team, including a wonderful set designer, Lauren Halpern. And I mean, I'm excited. And it's going to be the world premiere of this piece where, yeah, I don't want to say much more about it, but the script is good, and it's exciting. It's an exciting new play. That's what it is.
Reintroducing the legacy of Joe Papp as a human being, as a Jew, as a producer of magnitudes unlike, F. Murray Abraham said to me, Joe Papp was the greatest producer of the 20th and 21st century because he revolutionized the process. And we are all, as you said, standing on his shoulders, because all the theater companies now, the whole concept of a workshop, free Shakespeare in the park, there's so many things that he gave us, to the point that even Hamilton, the biggest theater piece in the world today, was developed under the auspices of the public theater within that same concept that he basically created, that he allowed to evolve. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you would like to say about not only Joe, about the upcoming production, about,
I think I would like to talk about Gable Stages for a moment and say that, it's a theater company I didn't know much about, and now I know a little more. And it's such a brave company, and that it has a magnificent season this year that we are a part of. And the artistic director, Barry Newport, I mean, she has given this brand new play the best design team, right a terrific slot, the second slot of her season, very bold, and like Joe Papp, she is trying to make something for her community. And I that's what I want to say. And I want to say that whoever's listening and lives, within 100 miles of Gable Stages should come to see Avi Hoffman at Barry Newport's theater, because there's only 2 weeks. It's only a 2-week limited run, and you will be seeing a brand new play. The first people in the world. This is the audiences that come to this, and in a way, they are our judges and will help us determine the future of this piece, which it will have one, I'm certain.